I never thought the peaceful, pine-wrapped retreat I inherited from my grandfather would become the center of a war with a homeowners association. But life in the Ridge-Pine region had changed drastically over the last 5 years, and not for the better. Once a sanctuary of nature, solitude, and rugged freedom, it had become the target of suburban invaders who couldn't stand the sight of a wild property they couldn't control. And unfortunately for them, that wild property was mine. My name's Ethan Wallace, and I've lived in this cabin tucked deep into the Colorado Rockies for nearly a decade, living a quiet, simple life where the trees speak louder than traffic, the stars outshine the city lights, and a man's land is still his own kingdom. At least that's what I thought, until the Ridge-Pine HOA was formed by a group of smug newcomers who moved in a few miles down the mountain and decided the wilderness needed governing. At first, it was laughable pamphlets about beautification standards and voluntary design guidelines showed up in my mailbox, loaded with buzzwords like cohesive visual identity and community harmony, none of which applied to me, as my land had never been a part of their gated development, nor had it been subject to any of their rules. I was grandfathered in, and I had all the legal deeds, surveys, and county records to prove it, but they didn't like that. My rustic, weathered cabin with its dark log siding, metal roof, and smoke-stained stone chimney didn't match their pre-approved taupe and beige McMansions, and my truckin', old but dependable F-150 parked beside a shed I built myself, seemed to offend their manicured sensibilities. It started small, notes left on my gate about my excessive woodpile, warnings about unpermitted structures, and once a demand to remove my satellite dish because it violated sightline aesthetics. I ignored them. Then came certified letters, fines for ignoring landscaping standards, penalties for not attending their monthly meetings, even threats of legal action over code violations that didn't exist on my side of the property line. I sent each one to my lawyer, a nonsense woman named Sheila who assured me I was in the right and that HOS had no jurisdiction over my land. "They can't touch you," she said. "Just keep records of everything." So I did. Every notice, every interaction, every time a drone flew over my land, I wrote it down, stored it, photographed it. Still, it escalated. Someone began driving up to the edge of my driveway late at night, killing their headlights and sitting in silence for minutes at a time. My mailbox was smashed twice in 1 month. I caught a man in a polo shirt and khakis trying to inspect my property lines with a clipboard and a smug grin. When I asked him who sent him, he muttered something about the community board and sprinted off like a scared rabbit. When I pulled out my phone, I began installing trail cameras, perimeter alarms, and reinforced my cabin with extra fireproofing. I didn't want to fight, but I'd be damned if I was going to get pushed off land that had been in my family for 3 generations. Then, in late October, it happened. The night air was cold, crisp, and smelled like snow was on the way. I was reading by the fire when I heard a soft clicker sound outside, like someone stepping on gravel. I stood, walked to the front window, and saw nothing. 10 minutes later, I smelled it, smoke. At first, I thought it was the chimney, but it was too acrid, too thick. I opened the door, and a wall of heat hit me like a hammer. My porch was on fire. The flames were licking up the siding, crackling along the beams, and before I could grab a bucket or hose, I realized the fire was already too far gone. I ran for the back door, grabbed my bug-out bag, and dove through the kitchen window as smoke poured into the cabin. I hit the ground hard, rolling onto the pine needles, coughing, and looked back to see my home, my refuge, turning into an inferno. The fire department arrived 30 minutes later, but by then it was a total loss. I stood there in the cold, barefoot and shaking, watching everything I'd ever built turn into glowing ash. At first, they suspected a chimney malfunction. Then I handed over the footage, grainy black and white trail cam shots of a figure in a hoodie creeping up my driveway, with a red gas can, pouring liquid onto my porch, striking a match, and sprinting away. Even more damning, the getaway vehicle's license plate was visible. It belonged to Jason Malvin, the son of Janice Malvin, president of the Ridge-Pine HOA. I gave everything to the sheriff, who nodded grimly and promised to look into it. But weeks passed with no arrests, no warrants, and only a vague statement from the fire chief saying the cause was under investigation. That's when I realized I was alone and that if I wanted justice, I'd have to drag it into daylight myself. I hired private investigators, forensic analysts, and my lawyer filed emergency motions to secure every record, email, and meeting minute the HOA had touched in the last 2 years. What we uncovered was a web of corruption and greed more twisted than I imagined. The HOA had been in talks with a real estate developer who wanted to build a ski resort and luxury rental cabins right on my land. My cabin, my trees, my creek, they were all listed on a development opportunity blueprint submitted months before the fire. And the HOA's meeting notes revealed casual discussions of how removing obstructions would streamline project viability. I wasn't an eccentric loner to them, I was a financial roadblock, and they tried to eliminate me like you'd remove a stubborn tree stump. What they didn't expect was that I would fight back. And I wasn't just fighting for myself, was fighting for everyone who'd ever been bullied by these petty tyrants with clipboards and bylaws. As winter rolled in, I filed a civil lawsuit for arson, property destruction, and conspiracy. I also filed criminal complaints against Jason and Janice Malvin, backed by video evidence, audio recordings of HOA meetings leaked by a disgruntled former member, and even emails recovered from deleted Gmail accounts that included phrases like, "If we torch that dump, insurance won't cover him and he won't stay after a good scare." The sheriff's office, once reluctant, was forced into action by the sheer weight of evidence and mounting public attention. Local news caught wind of the case, and soon journalists were knocking on my doorwell. My trailer, which I'd parked near the scorched ruins of the cabin, asking for interviews. I gave them everything. Pictures of the fire, video clips, HOA documents. The story exploded. Headlines read, "HOA burns down cabin in land grab scheme, and local man takes on HOA corruption machine." Suddenly I wasn't just Ethan Wallace anymore, I was a symbol of resistance. A mountain man who'd been burned, but not broken. Donations poured in to help me rebuild. Legal experts offered pro bono services, and the Malvins, once untouchable, were now the focus of a statewide investigation into HOA fraud and abuse. But I wasn't stopping there. Sheila and I filed a federal RICO suit. Racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations act against the HOA, the development company, and anyone involved in the conspiracy. We claimed intentional arson, fraud, harassment, intimidation, destruction of property, attempted forced displacement, and criminal conspiracy. Every affidavit, every document, every blurry photo went into our case. And as discovery began, more victims came forward, other residents who had been fined into foreclosure, harassed with baseless violations, and driven from their homes through dirty tactics. What started as a personal nightmare had grown into a class action case with over a dozen plaintiffs. The court date was set. My land was no longer a battleground, it was a symbol, a message to every overreaching HOA that some of us still fight for what's ours. As I stood on the blackened soil where my cabin once stood, frost crunching under my boots, I could see the stakes clearly. This wasn't just about rebuilding a home, it was about making them pay for every ounce of destruction, every night of fear, every memory they tried to erase. The fire they started didn't destroy them, it forged me. And when the trial began, they would finally learn that I was not a man to be scared off with flames and threats. I was coming for justice, and I was bringing hell with me. The courtroom smelled of old wood and cold ambition, the kind of sterile environment that had watched years of secrets come to light under harsh, fluorescent bulbs and the bang of a judge's gavel. And as I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by my attorneys, I felt a calm fury settle over me like the slow coil of a mountain storm, quiet but unrelenting. It had been months since that horrifying night my family cabin had burned to the ground, months of investigation, evidence collection, sleepless nights filled with rage and purpose, and now, finally, the Ridge Pine HOA, the same smug collective that had once tried to bully, intimidate, and finally destroy my life, was going to face the full weight of the law. Across from me sat the defendants, the entire board of the Ridge Pine HOA, including Janice Malvin, the president with a smile of a python, her son Jason, the arsonist caught on grainy nighttime footage pouring accelerant across my front deck, their slippery lawyer in a $2,000 suit who kept blinking like he hadn't slept in weeks, and a PR rep who looked like she regretted taking this job the moment I walked in. The trial had drawn attention not just locally, but statewide, because once word got out that a supposedly respected HOA had not only harassed residents but actively committed arson to force a property sale, media swarmed like vultures around a fresh carcass. The first few days of the trial were procedural, laying out